I think it's as important now to kind of market your company to employees as it is to market your company to prospective clients.
Every single individual has a story to tell, and they're great stories that need to be heard.
I want every listener to know they have the ability to change the world.
Welcome to the 1720 podcast.
Happy New Year, Mountain Movers. Welcome to Season 5 of the 1720 podcast. We hope you all had an amazing break, good Christmas, and are charged up and ready for the new year. I know we are about to break down some awesome topics specific to construction. We typically start the year off with a bang, and we are this year with Scott Kimpland.
Scott, welcome to the podcast, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We normally start out with letting you intro yourself, and wherever that goes. But so let's just do that. Who's Scott Kimpland?
Yeah, Scott Kimpland's just a normal guy that's worked in the construction industry for about 37 years, doing consulting, primarily working with labor-intensive contractors, just helping them figure out how to better manage and control the biggest controllable cost in their business, which is labor. And grew up in Tampa, Florida, suburb right outside of Tampa, in a construction family. My dad was actually an estimator for a masonry contracting firm. He was smart enough not to hire me. I was probably smart enough not to go to work for him, but always kind of grew up around the industry, loved it, and ended up staying in Tampa. Went to school there. Ended up staying in Tampa. I went to work for FMI, right out of graduate school there.
That's every once in a while we catch a story. It's like I've been at the same place for I think it's on the 36 plus years. That seems like an unusual story in 2020. I guess 2024 to have is just at the same place for so long, right?
Yeah. I mean, I consider myself pretty blessed to have found something that I'm relatively good at. I love doing it. It has an impact on my clients, both professionally, their business, and I've got clients I've been with for many, many years that I've just kind of seen their business grow and thrive, and also personally just create personal wealth for themselves and a better life for themselves. So I'm probably one of those few people that goes to work at one employer professionally and stays there for the duration. But I just found something that worked for me.
Yeah. What give us an FMI, not pitch, but what does the umbrella of FMI do? Because I know you, at least at this point in your career, are in a specific sort of vertical for FMI. But what do they do?
Yep. So FMI is they're a national firm. We're based in Raleigh, North Carolina. We have offices in Tampa, which is where I'm located. We have an office in Houston, an office in Denver. Cover the U.S. We do a little bit of international work, and at a very high level, there's really two sides to the business. One side is our FMI Capital Advisors. They are they're pretty much an M&A house. They do more transactions in the construction space or the building product space than anybody out there, primarily seller representation, anything to do with transfer of stock. It might be an internal sale to a management team. ESOPs have become pretty popular. We've got folks that do that kind of work as well, but that's kind of a transactional business. And the other side of the house is the consulting side, which I'm on, and we've got a pretty wide range of service. But think of anything relative to managing and leading a construction-related business. Most of our clients are contractors, but we have a fair amount of clients in the building product space, construction materials, aggregates, producers. Anybody that kind of touches our industry could be a client, but generally it's contractors. We do a lot of strategic planning, helping people just figure out, where to play, how to play, where the world's going, how to get aligned in those intersections where money's going to be spent. We've got a pretty big research group that supports strategy. Usually when we're doing strategy, we're doing market research too, to bring some real data to the table to help them make business decisions around strategy. We've got a group that does compensation consulting. So if you're looking at benchmarking compensation, developing short-term incentive compensation plans, long-term golden handcuff plans, they do a lot of that kind of work. It's probably the hottest area in our business right now, just because the labor market is like it is. And I work in a group that does operational consulting, primarily helping good contractors become great contractors. And I'd say, probably 90% of my clients are either specialty trade contractors, but people that kind of live and die by their ability to manage and control labor.
Mm-hmm.
The strategy group, they tend to work more with larger GCs, that sort of thing. So we've got a pretty good mix, and it could be even in the civil markets as well. We do quite a bit there.
I haven't heard that many people that started their construction journey on the consulting side.
Yep.
And so from the upbringing, your dad didn't want you maybe involved in the masonry, but construction wasn't so scary that it completely kept you away. So how did you start?
Yeah, I got out of graduate school. Actually, I got my undergraduate in 1984 from University of South Florida in business, and at the time I graduated in '84. I kind of saw the opportunities that some of my friends were getting, and people that I went to school with, and they weren't too exciting. So I kind of went and hid in school for a few more years.
Yeah.
I got my MBA out of University of South Florida in '87. And interesting, I was interviewing with several firms, had a couple offers that would require me to move and leave Tampa. And one of my classmates, a buddy I went to school with, I ran into him one evening and said, "Hey, you need to interview with this firm." And so at the time, FMI would hire kind of freshly minted MBAs. They'd kind of staple them to the hip of a senior guy that knew the industry, and you kind of traveled with them for a period of time and learned the business. And it kind of learned, the industry and learned what we did. So that's kind of how I got my start.
And so then you're stapled to the hip of a senior fella that shows you around. And as I recall from, when we talked at lunch, that sent you in a couple of different spots, but eventually you pulled out and said, no, this is the space that I want to live in.
Yep.
Specifically. Where are all the other stops you made along the way there?
Yeah, so at that time, we would hire, I would call it kind of more of a generalist model. So on any given day, I might be helping somebody with a compensation-related issue. Next week I might be working with somebody on strategy, strategic planning. A week later I might be helping somebody operationally. And you guys are probably too young to remember, but the market took a dip in about 92.
Mm-hmm.
92 was a little bit of a downturn. And we reevaluated our business at the time and kind of figured out, hey, we were about a mile wide in everything because all of our people were generalists and an inch deep, right? So at that time, we kind of reorganized, and I just happened to be working with a lot of labor-intensive guys at that time. And I was never the smartest person at FMI. There was we've got some really bright, talented people there. But what I quickly figured out is with these trade contractors, if you're spending $20, $30 million worth of labor a year, if you can help them improve productivity by 5%, it's a real impact to the bottom line. You can do the math on, 20 million at 5%, it's $1 million you can throw to the bottom line. So I just got passionate about working with trade contractors. They're one of the few, people in the industry that actually build stuff anymore. Most general contractors and construction managers, they manage contracts, they manage schedules, they manage change, that sort of thing. But the trade contractors actually build stuff. And that was always exciting to me. And I can remember my dad, till the day he died, driving me around and pointing to buildings that he built 20 years earlier that he'd lost his butt on, and they'd given him a second heart attack. But there's just something about the tangible things we produce as an industry. They're still standing 50 years later. You can show them to your kids, and that just kind of always that always juiced me up.
That's how I think we're probably all like that. Maybe everyone who lives in the built environment's like that, but we'll drive by a building now these days, and I'll pull off. I'm like, I wonder who's working on that. Is it? Try to see what job trailers are over there, and if I see a buddy who's on, I'll take a picture and be like, "Hey, man, see your stuff over here." And it is a sense of like pride in seeing the physical labors of your work like going up,
Yep.
and collegial in the sense that I love seeing. Air quotes. I love seeing your job trailer there and like saying, "Hey, this is your job. That's cool. I didn't know you were over here. That's awesome. How's it going?" There's something to that, so I get that for sure.
Yep.
My wife more than several times, as I squirrel off to look at an office and I start tinkering with the facade anchoring, and it's at like an event for her, and she's like, "He's in the glass business. He's just leave him be for 5 to 10 minutes. He's going to go discover what the systems are and all that."
Well, the truth be told, I'm not very handy. You wouldn't want me to build your doghouse for you, right? So I'm not going to be touching any important technical stuff on a job. But I just always found that environment to be cool, and I always found it interesting that while you have a lot of people who maybe don't have a formal education, but they're incredibly smart, if you look at the things that we're able to build, and just, we just got back from a trip to Italy a few months ago, and just looking at the things people built without technology, without tools, without equipment. But, this industry just always figures out how to rise to the occasion.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of reminded, if you go back to COVID, what was it, March of 2020?
Yeah.
And, the kind of world one day flipped on its head, and everybody in the construction industry is going, what are we going to do? We physically have to be on job sites. We have to work close together. But if you look back at it, within about a week, contractors had figured out how to adapt, right? I mean, they were figuring out how to get onto job sites, how to do it and maintain distancing. But contractors always seem to kind of rise to the occasion and solve the problems. And that always just kind of attracted me to the industry.
That is like wonderfully said, right? Because as you're saying that, I'm thinking through conversations. I mean, I don't know, Kevin and I had, and our peer groups had about like, how are you doing this? We did this and it didn't work. And then just the ideas start generating and we're just solving problems. It is probably part and parcel to what we're doing generally. And so throwing a curveball, it's a curveball, but we tend to hit it.
Yeah, it's a curveball every day in this industry.
Right.
But
right.
It just amazes me how we just figure out how to persevere, through grit. It's just a get it done, a can do, get it done kind of industry.
Yeah. One of your bullet points for what we're about to talk about is define operationally successful. And what you said about smart, like defining smart. What beyond book smart IQ, can you solve these problems? Can you troubleshoot with a group of people and get this thing built on a very tight schedule? That seems pretty darn smart to me if you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what is that definition?
I mean, just look at some of the stuff we build, the bridges and the highways. And I mean, it's just amazing to me that how do you get that done, right?
Sometimes we see these, squirrel moment, but there's a building down in Austin. I forget what it is, but the concrete structure looks like the building's about to fall over.
And where?
It's in Austin.
Oh, yeah, because you got that spiral Rolex building in Dallas too.
Yes,
that kind of
these columns in there are like dissimilarly situated, and it's just like when you drive by, you think that's going to fall down. It's not, obviously, though. And the point is, somebody came up with this crazy idea, and then they sat around a conference room table and said, "How do we do it? How do we build it?"
Yeah,
which is probably not too different from when they sat around and tried to figure out how they're going to build the Parthenon. They're like, how do we do this? I don't know.
Just get started,
Just get started, and they just pencil it out on some tablet or something, and it did something amazing.
We'll let the design catch up like it always does, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's been the case for eons. Yeah. Well, one of the things I think we dig into, there's a couple things, big topics, but you've seen a lot of contractors over the years, and so we'd like to mine your information as to what makes good ones, what makes them successful, what are some characteristics, tips, anything we can sort of mine your experience to share with our listeners about that. Now, I'll kind of toss a softball at you there, and we'll see where you hit it, and we'll pick it up and go wherever it goes.
Yeah, I think when you look at it, again, labor-intensive companies, the thing I always look at is their ability to consistently, on bid day, be able to kind of accurately or fairly accurately estimate, their labor cost to do a project. Operationally successful companies, typically, it starts way, way, way upstream in terms of even what projects they select, knowing their sweet spot, knowing which pitches to swing at, which jobs to chase. They're very selective. In a good economy, most successful firms are turning down almost as many opportunities to bid as they take. Mm-hmm. And I always jokingly tell people the two most profitable jobs that you're going to have every year are the two crappy ones that you choose not to take, right? Yeah. and if you go back and look at most contractors that in any given year, it's usually two jobs. And I don't care whether you're doing, $500 million in revenue or you're doing, $50 million in revenue. It's always two jobs. And if you go back and took the revenue and the cost, and if you did make any margin on it out of the mix, you'd probably be 80% the size, but making, 125% the profit that you would have. And so part of it is just that ability to be selective, not to feel like you've got to go after everything. And if you looked at a lot of my LinkedIn posts, a lot of it is just kind of around, mitigation of risk and upfront, making sure that you're not just taking something to grow the top line. So, yeah, that's one of the things I see about operationally successful companies. The other is just kind of a passion around understanding that, the only thing that your clients pay you for is when they install work in the field. And sometimes we get that backwards, and we kind of look at the org chart with the president and the CEO at the top, and you've got a COO, and you kind of get down to kind of the field level where you've got foremen and workers. But in really operationally successful companies, they really flip that org chart upside down. And the people in the office that aren't installing widgets or building things really realize that our job, the only reason we're here, clients don't pay you for what a project manager does.
That's right.
Clients don't pay you for, the great job of leadership or the great invoices that your accounting department sends out. The only thing they pay you for is work installed, right? So one of the things I've noticed is just kind of this, really successful companies kind of glorify the field. They understand that. You can kind of see it in how they treat the field. You don't feel the wall or the barrier between office and field that so many companies have. But I think that's almost I don't know if that's a cultural thing. I think it is.
Mhm.
And certainly if the business owner is somebody that came up through the field, they have a little bit better appreciation for that because they've lived in that environment a little bit. But I think that's a big part of it. There's no substitute for great people. You asked me what makes operationally successful companies, successful. I've always said that really, really talented people can overcome average or crappy processes, or even average and crappy strategy. Great processes and great strategy can't overcome, average or crappy people.
Ooh.
And so,
Tag that.
so I think, good people, and I mentioned we've got a compensation practice, and then generally speaking, you kind of get what you pay for in this business. And, if you try to go cheap and you're trying to save $10,000 on a hire of a project manager, a good project manager or a bad project manager can make or lose you $10,000 or $15,000 with one, bonehead decision, right?
Yes.
In an afternoon. Yeah.
In a second.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So, those are some of the characteristics. Successful companies have pretty consistent process. Over lunch we were talking, they don't have the 3-inch thick SOP manual that says here's how you dot every I and cross every T and fill out every form, but there's probably 6 or 8 things in their company that they really strive hard and focus to create consistency around how they do them. And those things really get down to how do they best put the field in a position to be successful and profitable and productive on the job.
I want to lean on the shop and field one, the craft professionals, because you and I were talking about this off air a little bit, and we have our work cut out for us to flip that script. If you're trying to do that as a company and you take one swing at it and it's not fruitful, keep trying. You have to consistently show that they're valued and they're everything, because without them, you're nothing in an office position.
Yep.
And you have to show it repeatedly, because we've earned as an office multi-generational distrust because of how they've been treated for the most part. And sometimes it takes showing the same person generosity or caring several times before they find out it's not a hoax. It's not fake. There's not it's not selfish. It's that you actually care. It might take a while to nurture.
Yeah. Well, and I know Dallas and Texas in general isn't a heavily unionized area, but when you get into some of the areas up north or in areas where unions are very prevalent, it's even a bigger challenge in those environments, right? Where you've got a union workforce and, you're trying to bridge that gap between office and field, because a lot of those guys, their loyalty lies with the union versus the employer in many cases. And so in that environment, it's even more challenging.
That is interesting. I've never thought about the union. I think about unions a lot, or more these days than I used to, but I never thought about it creating that office field rift because of where the loyalties lie in the union. That's an interesting observation. Yeah. Tell me, I'm going to go back to creating consistency. One of the things we talked about at lunch was, as a lawyer, my instinct or my bent or my, frankly, preference is to have a giant stack of rules, and this is how we do things, and it's in the book. And you said at lunch what you said just then. All we're trying to do is you need 6 or 8 to create operational consistency. To which I thought, oh boy, that's feels like a laser beam into my soul there. But I was going to say more about that, right? Because we talked a little bit about how you do it, the repetitive nature of needing to all that sort of stuff. I want to lean into that idea.
Yeah, if I had $1 for every time I received a phone call from somebody that says, "Hey, we want you to come help us put together an SOP manual," and my response is, "Well, why?" "Well, we need an SOP manual," right? Well, no, you really don't. What you need is a group of people doing a few things that really impact the outcome of a job consistently. That's really what you want, right? And an SOP manual isn't going to accomplish that. And so, our focus, kind of what we've learned is there's I don't know, there's a handful of things. I jotted down some notes here on a few of these things, but there's a few things that we think any trade contractor, anybody labor intensive, really needs to have a little bit of consistency around. And if you guys want to dive into that a little bit, we'll kind of go through those, and you can kind of stop me along the way if you want. We can talk about them, but it really starts upstream with some consistency around kind of go and no go. Which jobs are we going to pursue? What are the criteria or filters that we're going to run an opportunity through? And we're big advocates of trying to make fact-based decisions, fact-based, data-driven decisions in this industry. If you've lived in this industry for a while, you realize a lot of contractors are gunslingers. They make gut from the hip decisions.
Oh yeah.
But we found when you go back, when we're working with a company, one of the first things we do is go back and look at 2 or 3 years worth of completed projects. And we kind of look at, kind of what was your bid day margin, what was your final margin, what was your labor estimate with all the change orders included, what did you actually spend on labor? Every direct cost item, what was your anticipated spend, what was your actual spend? And when you go back and look at that, you got to be a little careful. Some contractors just look at margin gain erosion, and you can kind of be right on your bid margins, but when you peel the onion back, what you often determine, and this is pretty typical with most trade contractors, certainly with like mechanicals, their margin comes in pretty close to what they thought at bid day, but when you kind of dig into it, what you find out is they overran their labor budget by 15%, but they saved 15% on material cost. And, that'll tell you a lot about, one of the things we found is you've got to make sure that you know and estimate your direct cost as closely as you can on bid day. And so, the go, no-go decisions, there needs to be process around that. What I would call estimate reviews, or having operational input, at least into larger, higher risk jobs before an estimate goes out the door. Somebody from operations ought to be involved in having some eyes look at that to make sure production rates look reasonable. Is there anything, just an extra set of eyes as the filter before it goes out? We believe there needs to be some process around that. And you probably don't need to do that on every project, but certainly your larger, more high-risk opportunities, you want that. That also creates a little bit of operational buy-in so that if and when you land the project, ops isn't pointing at estimating and blaming them for leaving something out. And
they still will.
Vice versa. Yeah, they will. Right. And then, where we really see the big opportunity for most companies, for just about every company we work for, is kind of in that period of time between award and mobilization. But, pre-job planning, how early is your field manager involved? How deeply is your field manager involved? How early does that superintendent or foreman or whatever you call the fellow that's running that job, in the field every day, how much do they know before they hit the ground? Setting up the budget, making sure that you've got a way to track production. You've got the right number of buckets, the right number of cost codes, not too many, too few. Making sure the field understands, hey, when I work on this activity, this is where it gets charged. But getting budget set up, and one best practice that we see often is I'll call it almost a rebudgeting process. That when estimating hands over to the project management and team, the project manager and team kind of go through another pass of the budget. And one of the most successful clients I have, they have a 30-day rule. That once that project gets handed over from estimating, the project manager and superintendent have 30 days to vet that. If something doesn't look right, they can raise the flag. But at the end of 30 days, we're going to have that budget set, and we're all going to be in agreement that this is what par on the golf course is going to be, right? And this is what we're going to measure against. So budgeting, pre-job planning, some trades, depending on what you're in, prefab, there's a big component into that. And I don't know if you guys have had anybody on your podcast talk about prefab, but we're pretty convinced you're going to see a lot more manufacturing in the industry 5 years from now, 10 years from now than you do. Some of it's an answer to the labor shortage, producing in a controlled environment versus the field. Labor tracking and productivity feedback is another process. How are you going to make sure the guys, your foreman or forewomen, to be politically correct, but the people running your labor or managing labor, how do they know every day? How do they know every week? Are they winning or are they losing? Are they ahead or behind? What's par on the golf course? Am I 2 over? Am I under par? But it's just amazing to me in a business where labor's managed by our foreman, how oftentimes our foremen are in the dark. They don't have the information. And then, at the end of the project, when it goes bad, we kind of point to the field, blame the field, but we never gave them any information or the right information to manage their job. So
let me jump.
Yeah.
in. Tell the story. We were talking at lunch where there was I forget, the job was going wonky, and the foreman comes in and the CFO says, "Well, look at these reports." And he's like, tell that story.
Yeah. Years ago, I was working with a mechanical contractor up in Virginia, and we were helping them implement some of this process stuff, and happened to be up there, and they were talking about this one project that was, really going sideways, and they'd start to have some pretty significant write-downs on it. And so my suggestion was, hey, we got a couple hours this afternoon. Let's kind of bring the team in, the project manager, the estimator, the superintendent, everybody involved in it. And let's kind of put our heads together and figure out, we still have, I don't know, they had still quite a bit of work to do. If you just kind of straight line the projected loss, it was going to be a pretty ugly situation. So, the objective was, can we stop the bleeding or slow the bleeding down? But I remember bringing the foreman in, and one of the first things that the CFO kind of threw up on the screen was kind of a graphic from their job cost report that showed them basically how much they run over on labor on these various activities. And the foreman looked like a deer in the headlights. And his question, I thought this was just, this kind of brought it all to clarity. His question was, guys, I'm 9 months into this project. Why is this the first time I'm seeing this? Right? And he's out there working his butt off. He's in the battle every day, assuming no news is good news. And all of a sudden, boom. And the ironic thing was they had data, they had information, but it wasn't getting down to the field level, to the guys that could control it or do something about it. But that's pretty typical.
I mean, I don't have a lot of insight as to what it's like inside the walls of organizations that are labor intensive, but I would guess some of our listeners just had a aha moment. They were like, yeah, I've never showed him those reports. Right. Because when you said that today, I was just like, man, that is, if there's no other nuggets, there's a good one. Is if you expect people to be held to some sort of standard, they need to be advised as to where par is on the golf course and how we're shooting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, another story that comes to mind, I think our industry's come a long way since this, but early in my career, I remember working for a big site contractor, and I asked the question of, hey, do you guys up front, do you share with your foreman that's running this job out here, how much labor, how many man hours he has to get this job done? And they kind of looked at me and said, are you crazy? We'd never share that with him. And I said, well, why is that? And they said, well, if we share it with him, he'll use all of it. And I remember laughing because we had done some analysis on their company. My response was, well, he's already using 125% of it. So if he only used all of it, we'd be in a lot better shape.
Sounds
right?
like good bottom line gains.
Yeah.
If that's your concern, we should implement it immediately.
Yeah. We got, so literally we trust people out there to manage millions of dollars of our labor, millions of dollars of, pretty sophisticated equipment, but yet we don't trust them with basic information to manage and control the job. I think we've come a long way since that, but I'm always reminded of that old story.
Man, it's a define smart thing. It's a respect thing. It's a lot of things roped into that.
Yeah.
That's kind of built into the cultural distrust. Pull the rug at the very end. Well, you failed. Really?
Yeah.
The building looks great. What do you mean I failed? It's not leaking. We're doing good.
Yeah, cost overruns, buddy.
Yeah.
What? What costs?
And who doesn't want to win in this world? Like if you set a target that's feasible, because that's another area where somebody will be like, you just got to set 100 a day and we'll win. They're like, that's impossible. Like, all right, I'm going to disregard that. But set realistic goals from the beginning and celebrate them. If they had a good week, hey, great week. Let's capitalize on that.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. You asked, I mentioned it briefly, but successful companies are pretty good at estimating. And one of the things they rely a lot on is, I can't tell you the number of times I've asked an experienced estimator, hey, how do you actually come up with the amount of labor hours that you're going to put in that job, right? And the response is, well, look, son, I've been doing this 30 years. I know what it takes to do it, right? I always laugh at that, right? And one of the things that we see successful companies doing is they're pretty good at collecting real production data on jobs and mining that and feeding that back to estimating so they have some idea of what their actual production is. Because I can guarantee you with all the variables today, the world has changed, but production today doesn't equal production 10 years ago or 5 years ago. Or heck, I've got people that tell me even post-COVID, production rates still aren't consistent with what they were before. So
what's the, I'm going to ask a third or fourth tier question here, but in terms of, let me back up and come at it a different way. Managing that, monitoring that, measuring that, is a characteristic of a operationally successful contractor. Got it. What's the blocking and tackling of doing that? I mean, I'll even come at it from a different angle. One of the things I've learned over the last 20 years is speed to blank kills, speed to cash kills, speed to information kills, etc. And how do you go about practically gathering that data, storing it, and then eventually mining it for this information? How do you do it?
Yeah, some of it is kind of the ERP system they have.
Okay.
But most firms now have, or most ERP systems now have some sort of ability to enter from the field. And the key, one of the big differentiators to me is that I always look for is when a person enters their time. First of all, are they entering time daily or weekly, right? And in some companies, if you see people at the end of the time in the week entering their time, I can guarantee you that's not going to be lined up. It's wrong,
Yeah.
right? And so you got to do it. You got to do it daily. But the other thing is, along with that time, there should be associated quantities or units that you've installed associated with time. Because if you think about it, heck, there's a lot of contractors that complain about productivity, but they don't even measure productivity because you have to include installed units or widgets. And they'll enter their time and charge it to a code, but they don't enter the units. And so one of the ways around it, and I'm just thinking of an example with a current client, but they entered their time. Their foreman entered their time at the end of the day on a cell phone or a device, but their system, for them to be able to submit their time, they have to submit quantities with it, and it won't take their time, so they don't get paid if they don't do it. Okay.
Okay.
But in that system, I'm sure people pencil whip it, and people kind of either juice the numbers a little bit, or they're off, or they don't really know. But in a system like that, I think it's always a project manager's responsibility that at least once a month, once every couple of weeks, to kind of trust and verify, and to physically go out and walk the job with the foreman and verify the quantities that have been reported or the work that's been reported is actually installed. And so it's kind of you try to get it reported by the field, but the PM should have some trust and verify responsibilities periodically to go out and walk the job and really see what's in place. And if you rely on the old, kind of eyeball of somebody looking at something and saying, hey, we're 50% complete without tracking the units, I can tell you're going to be wrong most of the time.
Yeah, you're garnering or gathering or forcing people to enter data that's garbage.
Yeah.
So you're getting, when you go to mine that data for helpful information, you're getting garbage.
Or worse than that, your project managers are doing their monthly cost projections or cost to complete projections off of bad data. And so you're going to have really crappy projections. And when you see contractors who have jobs that go bad at 80 or 90% complete, that's probably what's going on. Jobs don't go bad at 8 or 9% complete. They were going bad at 10 or 15. We just didn't know it. We didn't have the right controls. We didn't have the right tools. We didn't have the right processes in place.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask something specifically on that, but from a different angle. I want to figure out how to solve why the last 10% of the job costs 25% of my budget. So we actually have installed everything per metrics, and then it gets to the punch list, and then there's 17 rounds of punch lists, and for whatever, I'm in the glazing business, so
yeah,
we're there until certificate of occupancy. It's just we're going to have at least one person there to the very end, and technology's advancing to a level where everybody's got a tablet, entering punch walks as they go. Is there any hot tip on how do you make that cost drive down a little bit? Very end?
Well, I think there's a couple things going on right there. All right. You're kind of a trade, if you're a finished trade that, you're the last thing that people see before they accept the building, right? That adds to some of it. But,
congratulations.
Yeah. But the other thing is just emotionally, especially if it's a large long-term project. One of the things I think people that work in construction like about it is, there's always that next project to go to. And usually if you're in a contractor's office, I can always tell you when they land a new job. They ring a bell, they have a celebration, something goes on, but contractors get really excited to land a new one. I don't think I've ever been in a contractor's office where I heard somebody come out of their office hooting and hollering, hey, we finally finished one, right?
Yeah.
Think about that.
You're right.
Right? We don't... And I think
that's really funny.
But part of it is an emotional thing. If I'm a field guy and I've been out on a job for 12 months, 15 months, or whatever long is for the kind of work that you do, emotionally, there's a point where I start kind of saying, hey, I'm kind of bored with this. I'm looking for the next one. So there's kind of an emotional, there's kind of this emotional slowdown of what goes on. And then if they don't see where their next opportunity is, right? People kind of have this, hey, and I think it's human behavior. It just says, hey, I'm going to preserve what I've got as long as I can because I don't see the next opportunity or nobody's talking about it. And so, I think that's a function of it. And then you're past all the high production work. You're doing odds and ends. You're not very productive on it. So there's a lot of things there that can cause that to happen. But one of the things, from a process standpoint, I've got a number of clients that do what they'll call a job closeout, or they'll call it a kick finish. When we hit that flat point at 80, 90% complete and stuff starts to really slow down, they'll bring the team back. They'll kind of outline what are all the minutiae and details of things that got to get done. And some of them are project management things like, hey, there's a bunch of change orders hanging out there. Some of them are field things. Some of them are warranty. Some of them are punch list kind of stuff. But they kind of bring the team back together and do pre-job planning for the last 10 to 15% of the job, just to kind of re-energize people and try to reset the budget and say, hey, what's it really going to take to get over it? But they look at that last 10 or 15% like a little job in and of itself, and kind of plan it. Otherwise, how many times have you heard, hey, a couple more guys, a couple more weeks, a couple more guys, a couple more weeks?
Yeah.
6 months later, a couple more guys, a couple more weeks.
The cost to close has been the exact same dollar amount for 3 to 5 months straight.
Yeah.
That's a very real thing as a finishing contractor.
The kick finish. What'd you call it? A kick finish?
Kick finish, yeah.
I like that idea, though.
Yeah, let's get it over the finish line.
Right. Let's bring it back in, energize us to finish strong. I like that idea.
I've got a client that uses football analogies, and on the front end, it's kind of their week of planning. Their pre-planning is kind of before the game.
Mm-hmm.
They've got some timeouts throughout the game, which is kind of their short interval weekly planning. But then they always have the Tom Brady 2-minute offense, right? When we get down to the last 2 minutes of the game, how are we going to energize this thing? And that's kind of the same concept: kick finish and get it over the finish line with as much energy and passion as we can.
Yeah, and if you're proactively communicating, because some of that stuff is outside of our control. Like if the GC owner and architect decide there's going to be 17 rounds of punch list, how can you cut that off before it starts and say, hey, we're going to do this one time collectively because X, Y, and Z need to be present for this.
Yeah.
It's part of our QA/QC program. Something proactively to just make one lap around the building rather than
I had
redundancy.
I had a drywall contractor a few years ago out west that really did a good job of that. They'd go out with their PM and foreman. They'd walk the job. They'd make a list of everything that they had to get finished to be like done. I mean, it was down to detail. And then they'd put kind of a list of labor, how many guys, how long, to kind of get a labor budget. They called it their walk-off budget. How many hours do we have to complete all this? And they'd let the foreman be really involved in it. But usually in that list, there was also another list they'd create to say, and they'd go to the general contractor and say, hey, we want to get off this job. Here's everything we got to do, right? And it was pretty thorough. But they said for us to do this, this, and this, that mechanical contractor has to do this, this, and this first. And they'd give them a list of things that the other contractors would need to do. And they said it didn't help in all situations, but in a lot of cases, it helped the GCs go to the mechanicals or the other contractors on the job and say, hey, here's some things you guys got to get done, and they get out ahead of it a little bit. But they were very proactive with it.
Yeah.
So.
You effectively put a piece of paper in their file that's going to cause some trouble down the road if they don't do that, as opposed to like the just lingering or malingering ending. Now you're like, I can't do anything until he buttons that up. I'm waiting on you. Is effectively what's in that file now. And they're like, oh, good, we got to do it now because I don't want to have to deal with that at the end of the job.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I keep thinking whether or not there's a contractual mechanism to stop it from lingering like that too. We can take that offline though. Is it like the idea of like programming into like that closeout, that the 2-minute drill, like programming the 2-minute drill into it to keep to prevent the 6-month long punch walk. And technology is an interesting overlay too, right? Because that you don't have a 6-month long punch walk in 1999. Because you don't have tablets to take every picture every time you bump into something. You're like, oh, dang it, we bumped into that. Beep, click, and now it's on the list. Like, oh, my gosh, you did it once.
There's an opportunity, though, and that's what I wanted to flesh out, to look in the mirror. You have more control than you think. The easy button is just saying, well, the GC's doing that.
Yeah.
Well, what did you feed them? Have you fed them anything? What are they assuming that you're not communicating? There's a lot.
I tell you the thing I've seen recently around that, too, that's kind of exacerbating that is when they start adding change orders late in the project. Right. And change. There's actually a couple Canadian guys that did some research on change orders and what the impact on productivity is all about. And one of the things that they learned in that is your productivity. The more change orders, obviously, you have on a job, the more your productivity in the entire job is impacted.
Mm-hmm.
And the closer those change orders are to the end of the job versus the front, even a magnifying effect. And so you're bidding all that change order work and trying to get it done at the end, and you can never find the end, right? It just, hey, there's another change. And I'm absolutely convinced that there's some general contractors and maybe even some owners that have figured out they can buy work through change orders cheaper than they could have bought it on bid day, right?
Which sounds reversey. That sounds like the exact opposite, but no, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, how often does the trade contractor win the change order game and get paid fairly for what it's really worth? And, all the costs that are hard to calculate.
Well, there's an estimating overlay to that too. Then, I mean, I'm thinking out loud, right? So if this ends up in a spot where you're like, well, that's stupid, sorry in advance. But, right, like, because if you understand that the compressive nature or the productivity impact of late change orders, but you're still pricing them straight up and down, you're losing. Whereas if your estimating team almost needs to have a different approach to change orders as the job progresses, because you need to have a better understanding of that's research and that study, and knowing that, well, this one that comes in, we're only going to, at that point in the job, we only install 7 widgets per day, not 15 like we normally do.
No,
and pricing
exactly
that in, 99% of people who just heard me ramble through that thought it was stupid, but 1% of them thought, we've never thought of that before.
Yeah, no, that's accurate.
Yeah.
I laughed out loud while he was talking, just closing the sentence when he said, well, Canadian researchers try to tackle change orders, and they determined, in my head, I was like, change orders stink. That's what they determined.
That's what they determined. They determined they're terrible.
It's funny because depending on which side of the fence you sit on, general contractors and owners are convinced that trade contractors are absolutely getting just, making a ton.
We've all seen that boat, right? It's like the boat's name change order and the little dinghy next to it's called the contract. Have you seen that picture before?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, it could be further.
I live in Tampa. There's one of those down there.
Oh, is there really?
I think there's a change order boat. Yeah. But the unfortunately, that one's owned by a general contractor, though. So
right.
There's the twist.
There's the twist. Yeah. There's
the trade contractor's got the little dinghy maybe on the back or something. But yeah, that's a huge issue.
Yeah, we got ourselves in the ditch there because I couldn't stop thinking about how the Canadian research about change orders, they thought they were pretty good.
That'll be the headline in ENR magazine next week, right?
Canadian researchers think change orders are, they're good,
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to try to pull us out of the ditch because I think we have a couple more bullets before we head on to the next topic. But one of the things here is, what do operationally successful contractors measure? And in my little baby lawyer mind, I think, well, we talked about it, widgets and time, but my guess is it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, it is. And, there's a handful of things, but one of the things conceptually, I mean, think about it. If you were trying to improve productivity, think of a personal example like your weight. What would you measure if you were trying to improve your weight? Well, most people would say, well, I just jump on the scale every day and see if it's going down. Well, when you jump on the scale, you're looking at history, right? You're looking in the rearview mirror. And yeah, there's the day-to-day things you got to look at, like job cost reports, your production, your units and your widgets. But one of the things that we are big believers in is that you got to get back upstream and measure compliance to the things that drive project results. So those key processes we talked about, part of it is just measuring compliance to key processes. Hey, we started this big job. Did we really follow the pre-job planning process as we kind of laid it out? And it's no different than diet and exercise, right? If you really want to lose weight, measure what you're putting in your pie hole and your exercise, right? And so most people focus on the tail end. And I tell people, productivity is a result. It's a byproduct. If you're measuring productivity, you're way too far away. You got to look at the things. And so compliance to key processes is one of them. Obviously your job cost, your actual versus budget direct cost for everything, your productivity, units per man hour, man hours per unit. Change orders, the clients that I see manage change orders relatively better than others. One of the things that they manage is what they call total dollars of margin at risk. So think about this. How often do you actually have a signed and executed change order before you do the work? How often do you do that?
Contractually every time.
Yeah.
Practically?
But it also says that you have to proceed
At direction.
Yeah, direction. Yeah.
The
attorney's coming out at him now, right?
Yeah. But I mean, I think from my experience in my last few months, 16 months, the answer is never.
Yeah.
It seems like never.
So what happens once you've done the work? You've spent the cost. You've given up what? Leverage. You have no leverage, right? And so if you look at it, at that point, the general contractor has no incentive to get that off the table or to deal with it until as long as they can. Now, you'd think they were because their fees on top of that too, right? So it kind of amazed me a little bit because, they're passing, if it's a change order, it's going to be passed along to the client. They should be scooping that thing up early because they can put their margin on it, right?
Right.
But a lot of times it's not. And so, giving up that leverage. But I've got clients that every month, one of the things they measure is the dollars of cost that they've spent on every project without a signed change order. And they post that by project manager. So you'd have, your 6 project managers lined out, and you'd have a graph that spans 12 months. And it's just kind of you can kind of look at the trend over time and see, is that mountain growing? Is it falling off? And there's going to be times where it goes up, where there's a big change order that hits and it takes a month or two to get resolved. But measuring, we call it dollars of margin at risk because that's what it really is. You've chosen to do the work without a change order. And if you don't get it resolved, it's margin that you're going to lose.
Right.
Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah, I was thinking through, every once in a while, I try to take the ideas we tinker with here on the podcast and run them through my at a law firm mind. And I was thinking about how we used to do productivity reports. Productivity at a law firm is different, but you could see, like, that guy's not working.
Yeah.
And it became, it seems like a little, what's the word I'm looking for? Chastising someone else, but it in the right environment, it's not. In the right environment, it's encouraging because you say, "Hey, man, I see you got a lagging whatever. There's something going on. Can I help you with that? We need to get that off." As opposed to like, Brad's a moron. He can't get his change orders executed. Look at that thing. It could go either way, but I don't necessarily see it as a negative.
The other thing, and this might sound subtle, but don't try to teach people to manage margin. You can't manage margin. Margin is a byproduct. You manage cost. And if you manage all your cost at or better than budget, margin is what margin you put on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just a byproduct. And so I see a lot of contractors that kind of focus on manage the margin. Well, no, manage your labor budget, manage your material budget, manage your equipment budget. Because if you meet or beat those budgets, margin is going to be whatever you price the job to make in the beginning, right? And quite frankly, usually the PM or the field people don't have anything to do with how much margin's put on a job. So, I always tell people reward and measure your project managers around their ability to consistently meet or beat or get pretty close to budgeted cost on jobs.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
One other, go ahead, Kev.
No, I was just thinking in my head that we try to get material buyout just to offset how much we're going to go over in the field. It's just like a known.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
and we don't allow that. We say don't allow that. Don't allow a bunch of savings on material costs to offset labor, because what you're really running into is if you look at it. And I shared this data with you guys a little bit earlier, but on average, most people underestimate their labor costs to do jobs. Right? It usually takes them more labor than they estimated. Material they usually save, except during kind of the material price escalation period of time, but that's normalized a bit. And a lot of contractors kind of say, well, that savings in material is going to be used to offset labor. But here's where the rub is if you think about it, you're underestimating labor, overestimating material. If you continue to do that, what kind of projects is it going to steer you to picking up? Well, it's going to steer you to picking up large labor-intensive projects where you lose your butt, right? If you're underestimating labor, overestimating material. It's going to keep you from getting material intensive products, right? A project that's got a little bit higher material component to it. And so we're big believers that labor has to stand on its own, material has to stand on it. And we saw that real clearly when material prices started to escalate.
Mm-hmm.
We started getting a lot of calls that, hey, we no longer have that cushion to offset the labor. Now we really got to manage this stuff, right? And that's been kind of a 2-year run for a lot of people.
Oh yeah. And historically, at least for us, shop also crushes it. To your points earlier about controlled environment.
Yeah.
Especially in manufacturing, when you have station to station, like when it leaves, you have this prefab panel that comes here, you have to install every opening in that panel that day. Your metrics are almost perfection because it needs to cure to go to the next station the next day.
Yeah.
And my goodness, But if you don't know that you can only set 2 per day and it's not a field metric of 8, if you bid it like 8 and you don't understand the prefab process, you're going to be in deep, deep trouble.
Yep.
But yeah, they should all stand on their own. But I want the heavy material type projects, low labor for sure.
Yeah.
Like just insanely expensive glass that you can snap in, like that sort of thing.
They all kind of just snap in. They say if you're a glass guy, you could break into any building.
Really?
Oh yeah.
That's why you're always tinkering. See earlier. Yeah, that's why you're always tinkering.
An entry strategy.
Yeah. How do I just snap these clips off and get out of here?
I'll show you on the way out.
That's why he chases a lot of bank work, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Whoa. Before we move on from this segment, I feel like we might have missed something that I want to come back to, because one of the things we were talking about earlier was the idea of how do you push this operational change. And, the idea was, well, I think I jokingly said, well, you say it once out loud, then you yell at people when they don't do it, right?
Yeah.
But there has to be a way to, if we're going to go from a 6-inch thick SOP manual to no, we're going to really just manage to 6 or 8 things. Then you have a culture overlay and a process management overlay and a change management overlay that I think is important maybe to discuss a little bit here. What are y'all's experiences around implementing those change management processes?
Yeah, great question. Contractors by nature are just impatient people, right? We want to snap our finger today and have it tomorrow. That's just kind of the nature of the way we're wired. And one of the things that I've really learned over time is you can put, a few smart people around the table and probably an hour or two whip out a pretty good process, right? You could get it mapped out. You could have the detail. Here's the tools. Here's the templates that we use. You could do that really effectively. But changing behavior and getting people to use those processes consistently takes a heck of a lot more time. And contractors really aren't good with just basic, I'm not talking about change orders, but change management, basics. And so what they do is somebody puts out a memo and attaches the procedure of the process to it and says, hey, henceforth and forevermore, here's how you need to do it. And then 6 months later, they're like, wonder why nobody's doing it.
Yeah.
But change management is an art. There's research around it. There's a lot been written about how do you implement change in a big organization, and it takes time. And there's a lot of components to change management. One is just getting buy-in. Who ought to be helping you develop the processes? Are the people that you expect to be using it, right? They ought to be involved in that. So you've got some front end buy-in. But the other big thing I found is when you start rolling out new ideas and concepts to people around process, you really have to spend an extraordinary amount of time around the why. Why are we doing this? Otherwise they think, oh, it's another piece of paperwork, or it's those accounting Nazis that are asking me to report more information because I can't, or I won't get my paycheck. But I find sometimes we just miss the opportunity to clarify the why. And why are we doing this pre-job planning? Why are we asking you to track units and widgets and plug that in and turn it in every week? Why are we asking you to sit down and put together a formal weekly plan on your job? If people don't understand the why, they're never going to kind of really fully buy into it. And so some of it's just around following concepts of good change management, and change takes time, right? People don't just change overnight. And the mistake contractors make is they want to snap their fingers and have it all done tomorrow.
What's the best tie-in for why? This is maybe we kick this around, or maybe I cut it out. I don't know where it goes, but do I tie in that why? Why are we implementing this change to cash? Or do I try to tie why to core value? Or do I tie why to operation? What's the best place to take why and connect it to?
Yeah. I'll tell you where I start is, again, go back to the idea. Let's just use some round numbers. Let's use a drywall contractor. They're pretty labor intensive. For all intents and purposes, if you're doing $100 million in drywall revenue, you're spending about 50 cents of every dollar on field labor. So easy number, $50 million of field labor. The why should be, how is this going to impact that $50 million year labor spend? Because if I can impact that by 1%, 2%, 3%, right? Those little whys of kind of tying it back to labor has earth-shattering impact on the bottom line. So $50 million in labor, let's say you can impact it 5%. What's that? $2.5 million. I would tell you, in most contractors, that's probably going to get close to doubling their bottom line.
Yeah.
A 5% change in labor productivity for a drywall guy will typically double their bottom line. And then you have to kind of take it a step further of, hey, that's how we fund raises. That's how we pay bonuses. That's how we invest in equipment. That's how we train. You've got to tie that back to the individual employee because, they'll think, hey, that $2.5 million of, impact is going in the owner's pocket, which it's not. But that's how we fund growth. That's how we fund training, development, tools, all those things. So that's kind of how I connect the dots is everything I'm doing is to try to figure out how do we produce that $100 million of revenue at a little bit less labor cost, right?
And then return that value to the stakeholders, et cetera.
Yeah.
And which don't necessarily mean owner, equity partner, ESOP. It means that's how you get your bonus. That's how you get a new widget tool that we've been sort of pining for 2 years.
Education, training. That's how we invest in new markets and grow, right?
Yeah.
That's how we train our people. Yeah.
That's good. I like that.
There's so many wins, right? Like,
oh yeah.
Your overtime, you get to see your family more. You're happier. You're winning. The contractor's not down your throat. Like you're mentally more stable because of all those things not happening.
Yeah.
Like it's so profound.
Yeah. If all these things just take a little bit of frustration and make jobs a little easier, and produce a better economic result, just the impact on people's lives over time and just stress. It's a hard enough business, right? But we can get there easier, that's worth something.
That the overtime idea is an interesting one too, because it could be a double-edged sword because you may want the overtime, but in reality, what I'm doing to you is if we can manage this more consistently and more regularly with blah, 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 you get to spend Saturday and Sunday at home.
Yeah.
I'm not dragging you up here because we're always behind. We do these little things. We do 5% better in labor management. You don't have to be here on Saturday. How about that?
Yeah, and there's
That's
opportunity in the long run. There's opportunity. You might, because if a happier client, if you're working 40s, there's most likely a happy client. That happy client wants you on more business. More business provides more opportunity. More opportunity provides promotions. Like there's a big picture, but if you're not explaining that to people and you're just saying go, go, go.
I'm not doing it for you. I'm not trying to do it for the man, right?
Yeah, here's the other thing. We've been in a pretty good economy for a while, right? I mean, if you think about it, people that have come into this business probably since about 2012, probably the last 10 years, all they've seen is nothing but good, right? It's improved, it's getting better. But I will tell you this, the other reason behind why you want to be the most productive contractor in your market is whether it's a good economy or bad economy. If you're the lower cost producer, in a good economy, you're going to make a lot of money, right? In a tough economy, you're going to survive and still get work and still be profitable, right?
Yeah, there you go. Recession-proof your business by being labor productive. Yeah.
We've been a little spoiled the last 10 years. Most people have seen nothing but good times, but if you've been in this business 30-something years, you've been through some ups and downs. It's
at
not,
least 2 or maybe 3 pretty hefty downs.
Yeah.
I hope we don't have one like we recently. I guess was it 08, 9, something
10.
like that.
Yeah.
Hope it's not like that, but it does seem like winds are blowing a certain direction right now.
Yep.
That was a fun time to transition from the field to the office.
Yeah.
Hey, welcome in here.
Yeah. Everything's on fire. And it's like South Side of Chicago fire. A lot more swearing.
Everything's on frickin' fire?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and I tell you, when you get in those areas like Chicago where it's union wages, every percent you change it can impact on a union wage. That's big bucks, right? I mean, it's even huge, significant.
Huge. I
heard the other day a union carpenter in New York City cost the contractor right at $1,000 a day, and their contract. I think they work a 7-hour day is what I heard, but the cost is about $950 a day per carpenter in New York City.
And that carpenter gets about half, and then the union gets half.
Yeah.
I want to get in the business of being the union. How do I do that?
It's like the mafia.
I know. Did you see Ditch? We're instantly our Ditch, not instant Ditch. We get an hour in.
Yeah.
There was a Netflix movie about Hoffa. Did you see it?
Mm-mm.
It was really good. It was, the union ties, and it feels like a mob movie and blah, blah, blah. It was really good. I don't know.
They find him?
To find out. To watch it, find out, I guess.
I think it'd be big news if they actually found him.
I know, right?
That was my
and
attempt at a dad joke.
And that's why, again, a lot of those union contractors, those guys are pretty productive. They're well trained, they're productive because they have to be. You know, when a guy's costing you $950 a day,
Yeah.
he better be productive, right?
Really
There's a
good.
sense of urgency quickly.
Yeah.
That meter's spinning wildly. You got a crew of 20 out there.
Yeah.
As we sort of switch over to a new topic, let me plug you, Scott, on LinkedIn because you're constantly talking on there about some hot button issues that the contractors are facing. And we're going to dovetail into talking about some of those. But if you guys aren't following Scott on LinkedIn, go find him because just like with Drew from a couple of episodes ago, Scott's one of the follows that when you post something, I click read more every time. I'm like, oh, this is going to be good. So there's always hot button issues or tips or productivity. There's always great stuff on there. So go do that for the listeners. But talk us through as we sort of go into this next segment of hot button issues facing contractors today. Like any of them to you that jump out as like, this is something that every time I meet with somebody that they're facing or a challenge that they're wrestling with, it's really hot right now.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we really need to have on the radar screen right now is just around cash flow, cash management for a trade contractor. And you know, if you kind of look at where interest rates are going, they've been going up, and you know, up to this point, you know, holding somebody's money, the interest rate's not been too lucrative. But you know, at the rates they are right now, we got to really be thinking about good cash management. And one of the things that I've found. I'm actually doing a fair amount of training on this right now, just kind of financial management 101 for project managers and helping them understand why is cash flow important, that why, right? And you know, cash to a trade contractor is the lifeblood. You know, payroll comes due every week. And I always kind of go through this example. You know, think about if you start a project on the first day of the month, right? And your crew shows up out there and there's probably some materials that they need to have on job. So you had to probably buy those a month or two earlier. So right about now, you're starting to get an invoice from a material supplier. At the end of that first week of work, what do your employees in the field expect? What are they waiting for?
Paycheck.
Yeah, paycheck, right? So cash out, right? So you do that 4 weeks through the month. In the meantime, you're starting to get invoices from your equipment suppliers, rental equipment, your material suppliers, that's coming in. And finally, you know, your 4 weeks cash out. You know, depending on the size of your company, you know, that can be a pretty large amount when you put that across a bunch of jobs. Well, if you're spending $50 million in labor a year, right, that's $1 million a week in the example I used before. But then we get to the 30th day and we finally get the opportunity to do what? We bill the client, right? And the next day they kind of back up to your front door with a Brinks truck and they walk in with, you know, this cash. Is that how it works?
Oh, of course, every time.
Yeah.
That's why I'm in the business.
Yeah. That has not been my experience as a lawyer.
So that invoice that you send out at 30 days, when's that actually get paid? When's that get paid?
About 45 more days.
Yeah, 45, 60 days.
It gets paid if it gets paid.
So think about that. You've gone 2.5 months making payroll every week, paying vendor invoices they come in, paying, you know, your equipment invoices they come in. And it's literally 2.5 months before you see any cash come flowing back to you on a project, right? And you know, that's why cash is so important for us. We're financing it. And when the interest rates are high, what do we have to do, right? If we need cash, we'd go to the bank and they charge us interest on it. And I think you're going to see the next few years, you know, if the economy tightens a little bit, just operational impact. But if you go down below the line where you have other income and other expenses, right, you're going to have, or interest and other expenses, you're going to have a higher interest expense if you're tapping into that. And on the other side, you know, savvy owners, savvy developers, savvy GCs are figuring out, hey, if we can hang on to that cash a little bit longer and make 7-8% or whatever you're able to get, you know, even if it's 5%, that's a pretty significant amount of money. And I mean, if you think of some of these big general contractors that run billions of dollars a year through their company, hanging on to that cash for a couple of extra days is incredibly significant. I mean, it's huge. I can actually remember in the late 80s when interest rates were pretty high and looking at financial statements for general contractors and seeing them making a few bucks of money operationally, but then you go down below the line of other income and expenses, making more money on interest than they actually were operations of the business. They were, you know, we're kind of a bank, right? And I think, you know, to further complicate that, back to our change order discussion, again, there's going to be incentive to hang on to that money a little bit longer. It's going to be a little harder to get. The longer they keep it in their pocket, the better. And so, you know, if we're not careful, and I think, you know, one of the LinkedIn posts that I put out that probably had the most hits of anything, was kind of just talking about the idea that trade contractors have become the cheapest form of financing for owners and developers right now, right?
Yeah.
And it is. And to me, there's going to have to be some legislation or something that evens the game up there. And I don't quite understand that, because as trade contractors, we have the one thing that everybody needs to get a project built, which is labor. That's what. But somehow we've given up that leverage. Somehow we've gotten here in the industry, and I don't know how. And I think part of it goes back to just being too eager to say yes, I'll do it, signing up for bad contractual terms. But I think any objective person would kind of look at just kind of how cash flows in this business and say, hey, there's something wrong with that. We've got to fix that. But I think that's a systemic problem in the industry.
I agree with all that. There is another piece that I think is within your control as we talk through, like, man, some of the stuff you can manage is, I don't know that anyone's actually reading their contracts. And I'm not going to get too deep on this idea, but the fact of the matter is you've agreed to give a bunch of documents and sign a bunch of things and do a bunch of stuff before that they're contractually required to give that cash to you. And so I don't know that we're doing a great job from a compliance perspective, knowing that in order to get that cash, I need to do on this job for this specific general contractor these 9 things.
Yep.
We get sort of rope-a-doped into, well, I do this and I send this form and then they send me money. But no, because there's a missing form and you didn't do that. And then that one slides because there's 6 other easy ones while they're just still waiting on you to sign up, fill out some form or check some box in some online payment portal that you didn't even know you had. And so having a system, a project by project compliance system around that idea of processing pay apps and following up on that, super important. And I'm not sure we're doing a great job of it.
No, I would agree. A lot of times when and that's why I always say I think collecting cash should be the responsibility of a PM, not accounting. Because 9 times out of 10, when accounting calls, the response is, well, why haven't we gotten our cash? Well, your PM owes me this, this, and this. And so it ends up being a project management problem to begin with. There's actually I don't know a lot about it, but there's it's kind of a new software called Sightline that's out there. And the whole idea about it is when you get a new contract, you basically go through and kind of set up all of the parameters. Hey, there's a special form or requirement that this contractor requires, but it kind of forces you to go through that contract, but on the front end, it sets it up. And then it kind of manages and prompts you through that process so that you don't get surprised. Because here's the other reality is if you send them the invoice, but you're missing one little thing, they're not going to pick up the phone and, hey, Stuart, will you send this over? I really want to get you paid, right? That thing's going to sit as long as they can until somebody rings your bell and says, hey, this thing's 60 days over, 90 days over, and then you're going to call them and, another month has gone by before, any action's taken. So,
right. So
I think that's a great point.
And then you have another like SOP, right? We got an operational SOP. We need to be measuring this in the field and blah, 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 blah. There's a whole nother set of SOPs in your accounting department. No, this happens on this day and this happens on this day, and you're responsible to follow up with, that sort of thing. And as your operation grows, you're not necessarily doing all of the things that you need in a financial/accounting SOP to make sure you're doing and checking all those boxes. And then the third overlay is all the while your PM is sitting on documents that they haven't signed and your accounting team isn't following up and checking all the boxes, your legal rights are going flying by as you're not perfecting your lien claims. And so that all those 3 things need to come together in some sort. And maybe Sightline is a good opportunity to do that. But all those 3 things need to be coming together simultaneously to take down these barriers around getting paid timely.
Yeah.
And we're not doing at the trade level a great job of it. We're just kind of being victim of our own sloppiness, I'll say, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. And again, you can be very profitable in this industry, but if you're not collecting the cash, you just get choked out.
That's right.
You can be profitable and get choked out easily.
Yeah.
So
I think you've said it in a few different regards, and in this one specifically with project management, the why.
Yeah.
You like rewind to whatever that was when you laid out the 101 of money moving in 1 month.
Yeah.
In my career, when I was a project manager, you had a round table of project managers for a project manager meeting, and when it was around the 20th, I always knew this 1 p.m. was going to get torched for not submitting his billings.
Brad.
But Brad. Let's call him Brad. I knew that they were due the 20th and I could just follow that command. All right. Yeah. But nobody ever explained how important it was and what it did to the business behind the scenes, because I think people were scared to open up cash, talk about those things because that's like the secret sauce or
taboo.
Whatever.
Yeah.
If you would explain the why, it's like, oh man, we got to go fight for this.
Yeah.
if it's just one of the million commands we have, we might miss it.
Yeah, one of the things that you guys really bring to mind is when I got into this business in the late '80s or so, I used to say I'm in the construction business, with the C on construction being a capital C and the B being a little b. It was all about building and construction. I think today we're in the business with a big B on the front of business of construction, and construction's almost secondary to the business side. I mean, you can have the best building skills in the world and technical skills, but boy, if you can't manage and have the financial and business acumen, this is a tough business, right?
I agree.
That's
completely.
I love the visualization of that too.
Yeah.
Capital C turned into a capital B later. Like that is it.
Did your squirrel brain go to the chart of elements?
Like C is carbon and B is boron.
That's right.
And I don't think that they connect. But
Welcome to my lunatic brain.
do those have a covalent bond when they go together? Or
Here we go.
Here we go. Okay, we got in the ditch again. What are some of the other big issues?
We talked about trying to grow too fast. One of the things that just, again, ENR's top list of top contractors, I always can kind of tell a lot about a company when I go in their office, and they've got all the plaques of where they were on the ENR list every year. And again, if you look at it, we've always kind of had an argument with ENR that you really ought to run that list based on how profitable they are. It'd be a completely different list of characters, right? And so again, getting too hung up over size, I think a company has to grow to provide opportunity for people and to be exciting for people at some pace. But some people get so focused on top line, lose sight of the operational side, and just hey, we've got to execute this work and we've got to make money. That was kind of one of the other ones that I had a little bit of a note on here. And then I think the other big one we haven't talked a lot about, but right now, just this whole war for talent. But how do we become the contractor of choice? If somebody rolls into Dallas and says, hey, I've worked in construction all my life, I got to go find a contractor to work for, who do they think of in terms of employers and places where they want to go? But, I think it's as important now to kind of market your company to employees as it is to market your company to prospective clients. And some companies are good at that, and they know how to live and breathe that and to bring it to life. Others, I think it works a little harder for them. So attracting, retaining talent, retaining, developing, mentoring talent is, 5 years ago, we didn't see many HR professionals in this industry. We're seeing a lot of companies with HR professionals, and I'm talking HR professionals, not a recruiter that, tries to hire people, but I'm talking people from, the corporate world that are 10 years ahead of us in terms of just good HR practice around, attracting, developing, mentoring, compensation, benefits, administration, all that. I really believe you're going to see them have a seat at the C-suite in large organizations or medium-sized organizations the next 5 years, because HR is as important as anything as we do.
Well, that's consistent with the idea from earlier that it used to be capital C construction business, and now it's capital B business of construction. And that's consistent with the idea that we're bringing in other professionals to manage and organize and administrate our business practices of the business of a construction business. Yeah, that's well said too. Yeah,
I think it's just, I look at my time and I will say this industry is a lot more professional today than when I got into it, but we still have a long way to go. When you look at what we invest in developing people compared to other industries, it's still laughable.
Yeah. And some of us are doing better than others, but there, like you said, there is. I think, as Kevin says it time and time again, we've made some ground, but there's a long way to go.
Yep,
still work to do. So, well, let me spin us into like maybe some actionable steps, some big takeaways. I don't want to make it too big here, but I know over your years of spending time in the industry, there's something you could say like these are things that you need to be doing, or steps we can be taking to get better, or something as we kind of wrap up.
Yeah, these are kind of high level, but first and foremost, I think I think we're probably all guilty of this, is it's easy for us to point to things that impact our business that we don't have control or influence over. It's easy to talk about the crappy general contractor we're working for, the lousy no good owner, or whatever. But what I would tell you is there's plenty within our own four walls that we can really improve. And one of the things I've really learned is spend 100% of your time, effort, and energy focusing on, working on, improving the things that you can control and influence. I think that's fundamental. And I think a lot of people just get so hung up in trying to say, hey, all of our problems are the result of things that are outside of our control. There's just tons of opportunity in every company that I go through to just, to make incremental improvement internally. So just focusing on stuff we can control or influence. We talked about measurement, but I've always said, hey, find what you want to improve and figure out a way to measure it and keep that measurement in front of people. That measurement alone will change people's behavior. There's a lot of research around that. If you go back to the old school, Roger Bannister was the first guy to break a 4-minute mile back in I want to say it was the late 50s or 60s, but there was an interesting story I read about that just has to do with, measuring and sharing with people changes performance significantly, right? Think about how many people would go to a professional sporting event if they didn't keep score and measure stuff, right? Think about that. Right?
Just going to cheer for 3.5 hours and then leave.
Yeah, let's put a couple 7-foot giants out there and let them entertain the crowd and, call it an NBA game and charge people $150, right? And so, measuring things, getting people focused on the measurements. I think the other thing is just kind of a leadership culture around it's never good enough. Even my highest performing clients, you go in their business and you'd swear the business was, in trouble. They're making a boatload of money, but they just have this mindset that it's, no matter how good it is, we can always be better, kind of continuous improvement. But if you look at really successful companies and really successful leaders, I think that's just a characteristic. They're just never satisfied, no matter how well they're doing. All right. And you look at great athletes, same way, right? They're just, they're at the top of their game, but they continue to out practice. They continue to out dedicate themselves to the craft.
That's a dangerous double-edged sword that I don't necessarily disagree with, but like that becomes toxic without the right culture. Yeah. Right. Brad is no matter what we do, Brad is never happy. Right. That's different than, no matter what we do, we're always trying to get better. And Brad's leading the charge.
Yeah.
It's the same issue, but the culture dictates the way everybody feels about it. So I agree with it, but like, I just want to throw that word of caution out there is like, be careful, man. Because you make everybody hate you if you can't ever win.
The last point I'd kind of jotted down here too is I think this is a hard-working industry. I challenge anybody to find a group of people that works harder than people in construction. I mean, I look at the hours they work, the conditions that they work in. But one of the things I've found, if you want to improve and get better, is you have to commit and discipline yourself to spend time working on the business periodically as opposed to in the business. And by that I mean kind of getting out of the day-to-day. Whether it's, planning sessions, whether it's a business plan, whether it's a strategic plan, whether it's getting your leadership team together, but you have to carve out time to work on the business. Otherwise, working in the business will consume you, all the time.
There's always something to do.
Yeah, there is.
There's always something to do. We talked about this earlier. It's like Kevin and I talked, if you're trying to get better and you're waiting for margin to do it, it's never going to show up. You have to make it. You have to find the margin now to work on the business.
Yep.
Otherwise, you'll just get consumed buying it.
Yep.
Anyway, we usually close with like one big giant closing nugget. I don't know if you have one or not, but given we've thrown so many out on the table there's a lot of good ones. You have another big closer?
Yeah, I've got one just to kind of
sweet,
just kind of make you think a little bit. But the idea is labor's the largest controllable cost in especially contractors' business. Focus on it. I mean, I see people obsessing over overhead. If you're obsessing over overhead, you're walking over dollars of labor to pick up pennies of overhead. Mm-hmm. And again, if you go back and look at your financial statements, it'll kind of highlight that. But if people put the same effort into managing and improving their labor and productivity as they did overhead, we'd be a much more successful business.
Well, joke's on you, Scott, because we're not even recording a podcast. We just wanted a free FMI session.
Oh, man, that is funny. Hey. No, I forgot to hit record. Thanks for coming. Oh, man, this is awesome, Scott. Lots of great tips along the way. I appreciate you coming in, hanging out with us, just sharing your nuggets. And then if you guys aren't following Scott on LinkedIn, do it. And I suspect that is a place where if they want to get in touch with you, I know you're active on there. They'll be able to connect with you, DM you, follow you, et cetera. So y'all do that. Anything else, Kev?
No, this has been awesome. I took like 3 pages of notes.
Yeah. Enjoyed it, guys. This was a lot of fun.